The clips and images used in this video are used for the purpose of speculation, parody, and criticism under fair use. I do not claim to own the content shown or the characters. The only thing I own is the voiceover and a few background and persona assets. Thank you. Let's talk Iron Lung. Now, it's no secret this movie has been monumental and means big changes for Hollywood and movie making as we know it. Everyone's talking about it, horror and non-horror fans alike. But I want to take some time to talk about it from my own perspective, both in terms of the content and the creator. To simplify, I'll break this video up into 3 parts. The 3 subjects that to me are the most compelling and worth talking about things to come out of the movie. Breaking down a timeline of our main character's backstory prior to the film as I understand it, with some theorizing to fill in the gaps. My theory on what the Quiet Rapture is and how that affects the film. And my thoughts on Mark's creative journey. Quick disclaimer here before we start. I'm only an amateur theorist, and I've only seen the film once, so everything I say here is based on my memory of one viewing of the movie in theaters, as well as anything I could find online. As such, there may be some inaccuracies. Let's start with Simon's story. Simon, last name unknown, was born in the early aftermath of the Quiet Rapture, an event in which every inhabitable planet and star suddenly disappeared into thin air, leaving only moons, space stations, and the people on them, and the ghost light of dead stars. I initially would have confirmed this timing after the rapture by citing the fact it seems unlikely a child would have been on a space station at the time of the event to survive it if it weren't for the fact that, according to the games, in this world space colonization had already happened decades ago, meaning it's perfectly plausible he was already born and in Eden, that being the name of the main space station where survivors live, when the rapture hit. We do, however, know that he had to have been too young to recall a time before this rapture, as it's implied he was the one being told about in the opening narrative, where it was explained to us, the audience, almost as if being given as a history lesson. That, coupled with the fact that in flashbacks we see a young version of him staring at the last remaining tree in Eden in awe, as if it's the only thing like it he's ever seen, heavily implies he has no memory of inhabitable planets, placing his birth most likely solidly after. The reason I say his birth was likely close to the event itself and not way after is because even by the time he's grown, people are still reeling in the aftermath, implying this is all still relatively new, and they're still figuring out how to survive. Additionally, they only now seem to be putting in effort to find new resources at the time of the film, with only a few previous expeditions under their belt, implying they have reserves at the time of the rapture that are only now starting to run out. So now that we know when Simon was born, let's talk about his life. We know from bits and pieces of information given to us in the film, as well as the game, that at a relatively young age, Simon became a part of a radical group / kinda sorta cult called the Brothers of Eden. The Brothers, as the name suggests, were a group residing in Eden tasked with being the keepers of remaining life and the last living tree post-rapture. Hence Simon's connection to it and the leaf pendant we see in the movie left behind by the convict who came before Simon, who was also a part of the group. Also worth noting, the group was led by a man known as the Father, who is the voice we heard in the opening.
I see that question in your eyes. For what purpose do we remain alone in the dark?
We know Simon's joining had to have happened at a young age because at the time of the film, Simon has been incarcerated for what many people believe is around 15 years. And he looks to be no older than his mid-30s, with Markiplier himself being 36. This means he couldn't have been older than 20 at the time of his incarceration, and since he was likely with the group for years prior, he was most likely much younger when he joined. Given he joined at such a young age, we can assume his parents were either part of the cult or not in the picture. I lean more towards the latter. Narratively, it makes the most sense for Simon to have been orphaned at a young age, his parents likely dying either due to potential violence and the post-rapture panic, or, what I find more likely, poor resource management. This would give Simon motivation to join the Brothers of Eden, as we know one of the main things the group and Simon fought against was the COI, or Consolidation of Iron, basically this universe's big bad corporation, hoarding resources. This also gives him the perfect reason to be there for what became the crux of his life, the Filament Station incident. The raiding of Filament Station was a several-day-long event in which the Brothers of Eden infiltrated one of COI's resource-heavy stations in protest of perceived hoarding. It's not explicitly stated in the film what exactly happened in the 9 days the struggle went on, but it ended with the brothers sabotaging the station's reactor, causing it to explode. This caused massive losses and resulted in the total deaths in the incident reaching 62 people. It's unclear just how involved Simon was in this whole affair, but he was at least involved enough to earn the label the Butcher, and to be incarcerated for it, implying it's at least believed he was the one responsible for the most bloodshed. However, in the film, he claims to be at least partially innocent, and to have tried to put an end to the bloodshed and prevent the explosion that took so many lives, which would mean he was framed as the Butcher. Whether or not that's true is up for debate. but I personally am inclined to believe Simon for a few reasons. For one, this lines up more with his actions and morality in the movie. Though Simon is mostly concerned with his own safety throughout the movie,
I just want to live. Is that so wrong?
we see he does have a selfless streak in the ending. Even though he knows for sure he's going to die, he puts himself through more agony in his final moments to secure the black box with data that could potentially benefit humanity, even though it's for a future he knows he won't get to see, saying, "It's more than me." This suggests he does place great value on other people's lives, even those he doesn't know personally. Additionally, the fact that Simon clearly feels severe remorse for what happened, whether caused directly or indirectly by his actions, implies he agrees what happens was wrong, lowering the likelihood he would have fully agreed to partake in the massacre in the first place. His desperation to insist he's innocent, sure, could just be because he wants to be set free, but it seems somewhat like more than that. Plus, if he's not innocent, how else would his brothers have betrayed him, like he claims in the film? It seems likely in saying this he's referring to them going behind his back to sabotage the reactor, then the survivors leaving him and perhaps a couple others who didn't go along with the plan, given, as previously mentioned, the previous convict was another brother, behind to take the fall. Another small detail that's not that significant on its own, but might be worth considering as part of the bigger picture, is the fact that he received a life sentence instead of a death sentence, which could imply there wasn't enough evidence he was directly responsible to do so. Does any of this prove he's telling the truth? No. Do all these tiny details together make me more inclined to believe him? Honestly, yes. So for simplicity's sake, even though it's possible he's lying entirely, I'm going to be moving forward operating under the assumption he was complicit in the raid itself, the destruction of property, and perhaps even the deaths of a few corrupt COI members, but not in the deaths of innocents and the complete destruction of the station and resources caused by the explosion, making him at least partially innocent. But as previously mentioned, regardless of if he was innocent or not, Simon was in fact imprisoned under COI custody for around 50 years, up until he volunteers for the program we see in the film. That being allowing convicts to volunteer to go down in makeshift submarines into one of 4 known blood oceans that appear on the various moons in the wake of the Quiet Rapture, to gather data on potential resources and dangers that might be found there. In exchange for the convicts risking their lives to do this, on the slim chance they survived, they would receive a full pardon, and by extension their freedom. Unfortunately, as the convicts before Simon learned, the chances of surviving the program aren't just slim, they're practically non-existent. It's a suicide mission, and the COI knew this from the very beginning. It wasn't an expedition, it was an execution. They, however, neglected to tell Simon when he joined the program of his predecessors, and the fact that each one of them died a horrible death. All of this leads up to the events of the film, which I won't recap in detail here because you should go see it for yourself. I mean it, go watch the movie, then come back, because I'm about to spoil the ending in 3, 2, 1, where it's heavily implied Simon ultimately dies in the iron lung. That, or he's divinely mutated by the blood into one of the monsters down there, or he was hallucinating due to lack of oxygen or radiation poisoning and was potentially rescued. It's really hard to say what exactly happened, but I'll let you know my personal theory later on in this video when we discuss the nature of the Quiet Rapture. Here's all of what we put together with some extra speculation to flesh it out as one clean narrative. From the very beginning, Simon was born into devastation, a universe left reeling in the aftermath of the Quiet Rapture. With the majority of food sources suddenly gone, resources were scarce, aside from those owned by the COI, which the common people don't see much of. This resulted in times of hysteria, chaos, uncertainty, and need in the coming years. Eventually, the lack of resources is what takes Simon's parents from him, leaving him all alone to grow up in the post-apocalypse. That is, until one day he encounters a stranger. This stranger, an older man with a wise glint in his eye, introduced himself simply as the father and took the young Simon under his wing, teaching him about what the world was like before the rapture, the beauty of life, and the sanctity of the little of it that remained. Eventually he introduced Simon to his other followers, children like him he'd taken in, with nowhere else to turn, people who think like Simon does, cherishing life and hating the greed that took his parents from him. Over time, the ragtag group become like a family, going so far as to see each other as brothers, united in the goal of preserving life. As such, they called themselves the Brothers of Eden. And for a while, Simon felt like he belonged. But as he grew up alongside his brothers, the world, or what was left of it, never seemed to change. While the COI had all they needed to run their experiments, people were dying in poverty every day. Anger grew in the brothers at this injustice until they couldn't just stand by anymore. Peaceful protest was no longer an option. If things were going to change, they had to take matters into their own hands. Whether they liked it or not, the blood of the few had to be shed for the many to thrive. The brothers began launching raids on COI bases, both to collect resources for the people and to send a message. And if anyone stood in their way, They did what they had to do. They certainly didn't enjoy killing, but in their minds it was better to kill a handful of corrupt COI members than to let more innocent people die with nothing. Simon himself was reluctant to resort to violence at first, but over time became one of their most hardened killers. He was able to harness his anger over what happened to his parents to do what was necessary. He had the resolve to do the dirty work, do the things that were unspeakable. He was the man they sent in to get the job done when others couldn't, earning him the nickname the Butcher among the group. But he never lost the part of himself that cherished life. He didn't take it lightly. In fact, he hated taking it at all. But his brothers needed him. The cause needed him. Even so, he swore only to kill when absolutely necessary. He would never take a life for the sake of taking it. That's where he drew the line, and his brothers knew this. But eventually the raids weren't enough. No matter how many times they tried, again and again, nothing really seemed to change. Simon watched as his brothers grew angrier and angrier as nothing they did worked. Whispers began to circulate of more drastic measures, but Simon shot them all down, remaining steadfast in his convictions. Some of the brothers sided with him, though the rest seemed begrudging of his reservations, but he trusted them. They were his brothers, after all, his family. What he never could have anticipated was that they'd go behind his back. Filament Station was their biggest, most ambitious raid yet. 9 long days of infiltration and fighting, but everything seemed to be going according to plan, with minimal losses. That is, until Simon found his brothers sabotaging the station's reactor, and he realized with horror they were doing the unthinkable. They were rigging it to explode. He tried to stop them, to talk some sense into them, but it was too late. All he could do was take cover as the reactor exploded. 62 people died that day. The station itself completely lost to radiation. Simon and the majority of the brothers survived, but the damage done was irrevocable. By the time Simon came to, he and the few others who had protested the violence had been left behind. Simon's world had once again shattered around him. His brothers, his family, the people he was supposed to be able to trust, had betrayed him, abandoned him, and left him for dead. Death wasn't what awaited him, at least not yet. He and the others left behind were taken into COI custody, to which they were sentenced for life, labeled terrorist, and left to rot in cells. However, after 15 long, maddening years of solitary confinement and a lifetime left to go, Simon was given an opportunity that seemed too good to be true given his sentence. High-risk labor in exchange for a chance at his freedom. It was an offer he, frankly, couldn't refuse. After all, there's nothing they could have him do that'd be worse than being left to die alone in a cell with nothing but his regrets. Or so he thought. But he was wrong. So very wrong. If you've made it this far, you already know what happened next. The iron lung was not only a whole other trauma. Imagine facing CO2 poisoning, the lack of oxygen, food, water, sleep, human contact, hope, the blood everywhere, the cramped hull, the injuries, the torture of false promises of freedom, and the very real threat of death, the heat, the hallucinations, seeing the blood become your own, grafting into your skin, flesh peeling away against the sticky muscle of the hull, cuts appearing on your body, seeing and feeling your own arm fuse with the sub and being ripped off, flesh and blood and light consuming you, all becoming one. But it was also a pressure cooker, bringing all the pain and regret he went through before up to the surface, priming it to all finally culminate to his utter breaking point. And there, basking in his own misery, is where poor Simon most likely met his end. Or perhaps a fate even worse. Even if he did survive, what life awaited him to go back to? He would have earned his freedom, sure, but at what cost? His sanity? A traumatized, broken man in a dying universe? No matter how you slice it, just like his life, Simon's end is a tragic one. So there you have it, my friends. Now that we know a bit more about our friend Simon, hopefully that makes some things about the film a bit easier to understand. But our protagonist wasn't the only part of the movie that was a bit ambiguous. Now that we understand him a bit better, let's look at the forces he's up against. To do that, we of course need to look into the nature of the inciting incident of this whole timeline, the Quiet Rapture. The Quiet Rapture. What is it? What caused it? What does it mean? Well, my working theory is that the Quiet Rapture is ultimately some iteration of the biblical event of a similar name, the Rapture. I know, mind-blowing, right? The Rapture is the Rapture. The story with names like Eden and the Father and Simon has ties to the Bible. Who would have ever thought of something so crazy? But all joking aside, if this is true, it informs what was most likely really happening in the events of the film that were previously left fairly ambiguous, and shows us which potential ending is most likely to be canon. Let's look at the facts here. In the Bible, the rapture is the event at the end of days in which God reclaims his people, both alive and dead, from the earth, causing them to disappear completely from mortal coil and appear reborn in heaven or the afterlife, leaving those remaining who haven't become believers behind for a 7-year period of tribulation. Now, looking at this on the surface level, this all seems to line up fairly cleanly with our quiet rapture. A large chunk of humanity suddenly disappears into thin air, leaving the few remaining to a time of suffering and trial. But all of this implies the existence of a God. Well, lucky for us, there is a God in this universe, though it's very different from the God in the Bible. The eye we see in Simon's vision in the film, that's our guy. We know this because during the movie, Simon and a character only known as the Speaker have a short discussion about the nature of the universe and God. In it, the Speaker, who almost seems to have first-hand experience, refers to their God as an ignorant God that sees a sliver of our universe through a pinhole and thinks it understands all that is and all that will be. This mirrors pretty perfectly the eye we see peering through a peephole into our reality and observing Simon. But, as previously mentioned, this universe's God isn't quite the biblical God. This God doesn't discriminate based on morality or belief or justice or love. It simply wishes to claim everything that is. Hence why instead of only causing a fraction of the population to disappear, it attempts to wipe out and reclaim the entirety of life by removing all inhabitable planets and stars. However, as the speaker mentioned, this God isn't omniscient or even completely good like the biblical God is portrayed to be. It didn't anticipate the existence of man-made celestial structures beyond what it initially created to take out during its rapture, hence why the space stations and people on them remained. But this still doesn't explain one key part of the Quiet Rapture, the existence of the blood oceans and moons. After all, it's not like there's a verse about that kind of thing in the Bible. Or is there? Acts 2:20. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? The day of the Lord is obviously the rapture. The sun being turned to darkness sounds an awful lot like a disappearing star. And of course, the moon turning to blood. There's our kicker. This, at least for me, solidifies that the Quiet Rapture is in fact an iteration of the literal biblical rapture. But though we know that blood oceans line up with scripture, this still doesn't explain why they exist. After all, I'm fairly certain this God didn't create them just because they look cool. Well, though the soul can be taken and moved to a different plane of existence, we know by simple laws of nature that physical matter cannot be created or destroyed, at least not by a limited God such as this one. The matter of the stars and planets could easily be dispersed as space debris and gases. But where did the people go? That is, what happened to their bodies, their bone, their flesh and blood? Well, there are conveniently a few free moons now serving no other purpose they can put their matter on, in an ocean of blood and bone. This not only explains why the blood in the ocean has been observed to be human, it explains how the blood can anomalously exist in a liquid state in the vacuum of space. The games address this, how there's no scientific explanation for how this can be, but if a god caused it, that would explain everything. So, if the entirety of the premise of Iron Lung is just an epic sci-fi horror adaptation of the Rapture, what does that mean in regards to the events of the film? Well, for one, it puts Simon in a position to be an excellent parallel to the Apostle Simon Peter, or Saint Peter. Simon Peter was known for being brash, radical, abrasive, and speaking before thinking. This to me sounds a lot like Simon. He's also the apostle that's rumored to guard the gates of heaven, and was the one who denied Christ 3 times. Nothing super story significant there, just thought it was a neat detail. But mostly, it explains the nature of Simon's visions, the blood ocean and monsters within, and the end he ultimately meets down in the Iron Lung. The events we witness in the movie quite possibly aren't just Simon going crazy or hallucinations brought on by the elements he's subjected to. And despite the looks of it, they aren't demonic either. They are in fact divine. The blood ocean itself exists only due to divine intervention, therefore making it something of a holy place, wherein the veil between life and whatever comes after is thinned, which means the visions he saw, they were really God. How Simon was able to survive during the period the COI presumed him dead without using up any oxygen? Maybe he really was temporarily dead, only to be divinely resurrected. Perhaps you can't truly die there. Perhaps this God won't let you, preferring to have you as its plaything for eternity, similar to Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. It wiped out the rest of humanity and is now bored, using the few remaining as entertainment. That means the monsters we see down there really are previous convicts that used the blood to mutate and make new toys out of. The speaker? The spirit of one of the previous convicts, now creatures, reaching out through the veil to warn Simon. All of this means the end Simon ends up facing isn't death, nor is it rescue. He truly does become one of the creatures down there, the next in the line of this god's victims. Now, this isn't me telling you which interpretation to believe. The beauty of the film is largely its ambiguity and potential multitudes of its tragedy. As someone who's a big fan of AUs where Simon is rescued, I don't even think I'd want one particular ending to be canonized. This is just one of many possible explanations I personally feel explains the most. Only Mark and the game's developer can truly answer the question of which gruesome fate Simon met. But man, if we're right, Simon cannot catch a break. I think maybe it's time to lay off our guy here for a while, and now that we, hopefully, finally understand the content of the film, talk a bit about the creator. Now, as previously mentioned, I could go on for hours about why this movie matters to Hollywood and the future of cinema, but that's already been talked about extensively by other talented creators, and isn't what I want to talk about today. Instead, I'd like to talk about what Mark and his creative journey beyond just the movie means to me personally. If you were to ask me who my biggest creative inspiration is and has been for the last few years, I'd probably say Markiplier. I know that seems strange given what I do is entirely different from what he does, but it's true. I won't lie and say I've been there from the beginning. I was very young when Mark started out, and my parents were fairly strict with what I watched. Not that that's a bad thing, necessarily, it's just the way it was. But I've been there as long as I could. Mark's not only been a consistent comfort watch for me, his passion and never-ending commitment to doing more for himself, his fans, and those in need always moved me. I've also been captivated by his storytelling for a long time. His ability to create tragic and funny characters you genuinely care about, whether it's Simon, Damien, the Colonel, Engineer Mark, etc., is one I envy. I followed the movie's progress from the beginning, and his other stories, Heist, Date, Space, Who Killed Markiplier, for years prior. I've loved watching his creative voice grow and evolve and seeing him get better at telling the stories in his head. Going from the kinda muddy but high potential storytelling of Who Killed Markiplier to this is great improvement and so inspiring. My brother often teases me for just being a simp, but I genuinely feel like Mark is one of the most multi-talented creators of our generation. He can sing, dance, choreograph, write, direct, act, game, play instruments, make people laugh, make people cry, work his audience, etc. Anything he sets his mind to, he achieves. I admire how he just keeps pushing and no success is ever enough. And despite it all, he's stayed so human. This is the man who cried because his fan base got too big for him to have personal relationship with all his fans after all. Maybe it's weird, but I'm so proud of him knowing he came from humble beginnings of just being a small YouTuber to this. As a small YouTuber myself who struggles with apathy but has big ambitions, when I see all he's done, it makes me feel like I can do it too. I want to be like that someday. I want the stories in my head to reach people like his have. And some small part of me thinks that maybe, just maybe, if by some slim chance one day he sees something I've created, and dare I say, even respects it, that's when I'll know I've made it. That's the main reason I made this video. As a sort of gift or tribute to the creator who's come so far and inspired so many people. Will he ever see this? Almost definitely not. But I hope if he ever does, it'll do him proud. So thank you, Mark, for both a wonderful movie and everything else you've done. You're truly one of the greats. So that does it. We did it. We got through this chonker of a video. This is the biggest undertaking I've taken on video-wise in a long time. I hope I did the film justice. But I'll be interested to hear what you guys think in the comments. Was there anything you liked? Did I get anything wrong? If so, feel free to politely let me know in the comments. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and if you wanted to see more videos like this in the future, please let me know. Until next time, I hope all of you have a great day, and happy moviegoing.